Thank you all for being here at this session. My name is John Harris. I write for The Guardian. I also make films for The Guardian as part of an ongoing series called Anywhere But Westminster. We're in the midst of doing a further load of instalments of that at the moment. I spent most of the last week in Walsall in the West Midlands, where 69% of voters backed Leave in the referendum, and it now looks like one and possibly both the parliamentary seats in that town are going to go to the Tories. So I'm in a very, very good mood today. Over the last 6 years, what I and my colleague John Domokos, with whom I work, have basically been doing is exploring a mounting political crisis, the same political crisis that much of the last 2 days has been about. And by that, I guess I mean the way that a political system built around a broken voting system, an increasingly professionalised kind of politics, the sidelining of local and regional institutions, has created a rising sense of disconnection and disenchantment and the potential for big ruptures. And they keep happening. What happened in Scotland in 2014 when the vote on independence was so close and Scottish politics was sort of summarily reinvented, struck me as a rupture. The rise, and now the fall, thankfully, of UKIP struck me as another rupture. The ongoing fall, perhaps, of the Labour Party, it probably fits that category. And, of course, the referendum result was a huge rupture. Wherever I went in the country, certainly in the less affluent areas that voted Leave, as much as anything, people were saying, I've had enough. I exist. Listen to me. Politics doesn't work for me. At the same time, by way of hope, over the last 4 or 5 years, I've seen early signs of people doing things differently and trying to push politics and our political system somewhere different. I live in a town in the West Country called Frome. Frome is the cradle of something called flat-pack democracy. We threw all the party hacks off our town council. It's now run by a coalition of independents, very successfully, who do amazing things like borrowing money and spending it on the community. And that idea has started to spread elsewhere. I think of online campaigns like 38 Degrees and Avaz. I think of a lot of the noise around this idea of a progressive alliance, which, whatever its sort of contradictions and perhaps imperfections, has drawn people into politics in a new way to talk about new things. So there are signs of hope. I guess what I and probably a lot of you want to know is how to build on some of that stuff, how to take that to the national picture, how to change politics writ large, seizing on those sorts of examples. And it seems to me, and I guess this accounts for the timing of the convention, that the moment for doing that is now a matter of urgency. When democracy is broken, it becomes vulnerable. And anybody who reads The Guardian's sister paper, The Observer, and the sterling work done lately by Carol Cadwalla will know that there are very dangerous, sinister things happening as far as the management and manipulation of democracy is concerned, by dark money and fake news and the manipulation of data and so on. So this is a vulnerable moment for democracy, and it's a good moment at which to talk about how to reinvent it, and by implication, how to strengthen it. So that's what we're going to be talking about over the next hour or so, in the company of our panel, who I'll introduce you to very quickly. Over on my far right, though not politically at all, is Paul Hilder. Paul is probably the prime mover behind CrowdPack, which is an organisation which seeks to restore that kind of grassroots democratic element that's missing from politics. Next to him is Bess Mayhew. Bess is the CEO of More United, an organisation which seeks to rebuild a lot of values and qualities perhaps lacking in politics at the moment, post-Brexit, into politics, but does it really by bypassing those pretty ossified, tired party structures. Next to her, in the same spirit, is Amina Gichinga. I first met Amina about 18 months ago, when she was building up to standing for the London Assembly on behalf of a very exciting, interesting, innovative setup called Take Back the City. That movement goes on. It does what it says on the tin. Someone said to me before, what's Take Back the City there to do? And I said, well, take back the city. How about that? Next to me on the left is Nimco Ali, who I first met at Glastonbury last year. Glastonbury coincided with Brexit and was a thoroughly joyous occasion for all of us. She is an FGM campaigner, but is now a candidate in Hornsey and Wood Green for the Women's Equality Party. Next to her is Mete Coban, who's the CEO of My Life, My Story, which is a Brexit-related initiative which aims to give young people a voice in the Brexit process. He's also a Labour councillor in Stoke Newington, and you've been that since you were 20?
21.
21. He's been a councillor since he was 21. That's Mete Coban, and next to him is Mary Fitzgerald, who's the editor-in-chief of Open Democracy, who have done such sterling work putting today together. So please welcome the panel. Let's start with a question about now and this odd moment. Wherever I go in the country, it feels like the election is something that's happening somewhere else. Bess, what do you think the weirdness of this election says about how we've got to change politics and the political system?
Yes, it is a weird election indeed. To be honest, I think the way we change politics, quite related to the title of this session, how do we reconnect people with their politics? Well, simply we can't. I think people are more connected with their politics than they have been in a long time. But politics isn't very connected with them. And I think that's the fundamental problem. So if people aren't the problem, we need to change politics. That's no surprise to most people here. But the trouble with changing politics is it's very difficult to do. People in power, for obvious reasons, don't want the system to change. It works for them. So we need to hack the system. And last year I co-founded a movement called More United, which is trying to do just that. We're 80,000 strong, and we're hacking the system by giving people a way of influencing politics they don't currently have. Now, this morning, Nick Clegg identified 3 major problems with our politics. He said that there were moneyed elite, bankrolling extreme views. There is no competition and a massive lack of competition in the centre ground in particular. And people, but particularly young people, are not engaged. And More United is trying to solve each of those 3 problems. The first thing, the money...
Can you give me your spiel a bit later on? And just, and
of course.
Just tell me about how this election feels to you as somebody who has an acute sense of politics.
Well, it feels like we need to do something, to be honest. It feels like we have sat back for a long time while things have been going quite well for many, many years. And in the last couple of years, politics has become totally fraught. It's become divisive when we should have agreement. It's become extreme, and I think people feel the right to hold very extreme views extremely, but we don't hold our very moderate views extremely. We hold them very moderately. And I think we need to reinvent the moderate centre.
And do you think there's a voice that's not being heard loudly enough in this campaign?
Yeah, absolutely.
And briefly, tell me what that is.
People. I think it's dominated by parties, and what this one says and what that one says and who leaked this manifesto, and it's not dominated at all by people.
Paul, what does this election say to you about what's wrong with politics and the political system?
I mean, I've thought for 15 plus years that the whole thing was rotten, and I think it's increasingly obvious the emperor has no clothes. This is an election. Philip Gould wrote this paper in 2003 called The Empty Stadium. He was one of the architects of New Labour, and he was having his anguished moment about nobody's in the stadium anymore. And that's definitely true if you look at Theresa May's campaign events right now. Although I bet you there are people who want to be in those rooms who can't get into those rooms. I do think that this is a moment when lots of people are more engaged with politics with a small p than ever before. They care about stuff. They realize that it matters. Brexit was a big wake-up call for a lot of people. And I'm seeing this very strange thing bubbling up from the grassroots right now in this election campaign, where there are lots of people thinking, what can I do? What can I do? And that's where you get tactical voting websites starting to bubble up and getting seen by 200,000 people in a day. That's where you get the Progressive Alliance stuff, Best for Britain, More United, crowdfunding campaigns on CrowdPact that I'm seeing popping up every day. Momentum just raised 40 grand in a morning. So stuff is bubbling from the bottom up.
It's not bubbling very much in Walsall, I have to tell you.
Yeah.
There's an issue there, right?
Yes.
That we can all sit in our echo chambers, and of course those things are worthwhile and very valuable, and maybe point a way forward, but they're not happening in the places that Brexit kind of highlighted as being problematic within our political system yet, are they?
No one's organising there.
Right.
That's the problem.
And tell me about the extent to which you think that's an issue for people like you.
It's a massive, in my spare time, I'm running around bringing over people from the Bernie Sanders campaign to go and try and organise in places like that. And I think we can do it over the next 4 weeks. But
Amina, you have arguably tried to organise in, quotes, places like that. Mm-hmm. Tell me what that taught you about what's wrong and what's right with the political system.
Yeah, I ran in the Greater London Assembly elections last year in May. I was the Take Back the City candidate in the City and East constituency of Tower Hamlets, Newham and Barking and Dagenham. And we went out, we did poetry on buses at rush hour, talking about inequality and how we've got to take it back. We went and we did singing workshops outside train stations and singing freedom songs and relating it to, our lives now, our experiences now. And that's what I really wanted to get to the core of. With every person we spoke with, we were asking, what is your experience of living in your borough, your area? Because it feels like politicians don't give a toss about how you feel and what decisions you think should be made, even though a lot of people in our communities have the skills that are needed to make our society a better place, right? So we were basically reaching out. We crowdsourced our manifesto, so we called it our People's Manifesto. It wasn't, I said this earlier in the room downstairs. I said it wasn't a bunch of old white men sat in a room deciding how our lives are going to be run. It was people of colour. We had refugees and migrants, people that don't have the right to vote right now. 16-year-olds who wanted to abolish the police force because of how they're being discriminated against when they walk down the road and all they've done is be black. For them to be, put in the back of a van, strip searched, stripped of their dignity. Those are the voices that I'm looking for. And in this sort of run-up to the election, there are none of those voices. So it's really important that we get out there and we find these voices and we amplify them, and that's what Take Back the City is doing at the moment.
Nimco, you're standing, I think, alone among the panellists. You're actually standing in this weird, slightly awful general election. So tell me, A, why you're doing it, and then B, how you feel being in the midst of it.
I am standing in Hornsey Wood Green, and one of the key reasons why I'm standing and why this kind of election process is kind of weird is, so I'm an anti-FGM campaigner, and so I had FGM when I was 7 years old, and I came back to this country, tried to tell my story, and for almost 20 years I was talked at and talked about and never engaged with. And I remember when I first saw my silence as complicit to the misunderstanding, because I'd worked out that FGM was a form of violence against women and girls. I knew that it had nothing to do with my culture, my race. It was all to do with my gender. And I just assumed everybody around me would finally get that. I was in a school in inner city Bristol trying to inspire young girls to go to a red brick university and just aspire to do something else. And there was 13 girls, and there was 14 girls, and 13 of those girls had been cut. And I thought, my God, it's 17 years since I've been cut. What the hell is going on? And this is what this election is about as well. This is why the reason why I'm standing for the Women's Equality Party. We are the kind of party that you want us, I want you to put me out of business, Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dems, take our policies and actually make equality something that is key to all the policies that you're going to do. So there's nobody that speaks for me. So I've always been asked since 2010 to stand. I was offered a safe Tory seat, but I'm not a Tory. I would not be standing with the Labour Party right now because I don't agree with the men that are leading it, and they don't really care about me either. They think they know me and they assume they know me. And no offence, but I don't understand what the Lib Dems stand for. So the Women's Equality Party is the only party that, no offence to Lib Dems, but I'm non-partisan on that platform as well. But the Women's Equality Party stands for ending violence against women and girls, real costed policy about care, real policies about the housing crisis and all these other kind of things. So I'm standing because I can be the voice for a lot of people, and the kind of people that Amina talked about. I am everything that you're told to be scared of. I'm a woman, I'm black, I'm a child of a refugee, I'm a Muslim, but I'm also what makes this country great, and that's the main reason why I'm standing, because I'm proud to be British and I want to be part of our democracy.
Mete, you're a councillor, so you know about politics at the sharp end. How big do you feel the gap is between the politics you deal with on a day-to-day level as a councillor and what we see when we switch on the TV every night at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously different types. I mean, as a councillor, there's a big misconception to a lot of people don't even know what councillors do. I got elected when I was 21. One of the reasons why I went into it was because I'm from a place called Hackney. Now it's a very trendy place to live, but when I was growing up in Hackney, I didn't get to have secondary education in Hackney because all the schools were getting shut down. More than 50% of 11-year-old pupils had to leave the borough to sort of seek secondary education in 2003, and my local youth club got shut. And these things sort of got me to think about why these things are happening, and looking at, the average age of, by any chance, does anyone know what the average age of a councillor in the UK is? 50? So 66. Oh. Yeah. Oh. So 66 is the average age of a councillor. And that was that. So when looking at the sort of the makeup of the council, it sort of prompted me to think about, do you know what? Well, I do care about issues. I could sit here and complain about it, but actually I want to go into it and actually try to make a difference. And I see the best of both worlds, John, because I campaigned for an organisation called My Life, My Say, fighting for young people's rights, but at the same time I'm in politics too. And there's a massive disconnect in terms of the structures of politics are very outdated. So even myself, when I first got elected as a councillor, I'll never forget the first weekend I got invited to a Young Councillors Network conference. And I was quite excited by it because I thought, do you know what, good, I'm going to go to meet people who probably got elected maybe a bit older than me, but I could get experience from them. And you never guessed the age criteria was under 40. So that completely killed out for me. But there is a lot of, we do get patronised a lot. Like when I first became a councillor, people were saying, well done, Mete, very good question you asked in the council chamber. And they wouldn't usually say that to another councillor as well. So there's a massive disconnect in terms of, from my experience of being a councillor in Stoke Newington, to issues that people care about. People, of course, care about issues, but they don't, and it all comes back down to education. It's what Carla was talking about earlier on as well. People, of course, especially young people, they do care about issues. It's not that they don't care about issues, but the thing is, when you think of politics, you often think Parliament, Westminster, MPs, but actually it's more than that. It's about, your recycling bag getting picked up front of your home, or your train services running on time. So it's about how do we make politics relevant to people's everyday issues, and the reality is that, again, coming back to this election as well, it's not a quick fix. It's not a quick fix. It has to go back down to education. So, unfortunately, we'll probably end up with a situation again in this election where a large proportion of the people that need to really engage with our democracy probably won't engage again, and we need to really think about a long-term solution to how we do that.
Okay, let's move on to what might conceivably be done. We know voices are missing from our politics. We know that party structures feel old. We know that people feel patronised and condescended to. We know that Brexit happened. We know that we now know. I didn't know that the average age of a councillor in the UK is 66. Certain places I've lived, it felt like it was about 85, I have to say. But should try living in mid-Wales. What we're going to do, Mary, we've had a session this afternoon where people were talking about how to change politics and the political system. They were talking about proportional representation, abolishing the House of Lords, votes at 16, two-term limits on MPs, powers of recall. We kind of all know this. It's a fairly well-rehearsed script, but right here, right now, how do you find the openings to begin to change it?
I will just answer your first question, which is how does this election feel to you? I'll say it doesn't feel like an election. Right? I work in the media, yeah? This is not an election, right? We are not having a Prime Minister who takes questions from journalists.
No.
We don't have an opposition. We don't have... and we do have an opposition. Personally, I believe that the Labour Party manifesto is a really interesting, really radical programme. But I will say that there is not a team around the Labour leadership that is communicating that with enough creativity. Yes, they may have the forces stacked against them, but they are still not cutting through, despite the very radical and interesting ideas they're proposing. So effectively, you have no opposition, because you also have a system where political parties won't work together. We keep talking about progressive alliance, but actually, and citizens are demanding it, political parties are not doing it.
Okay,
so,
well, what are we going to do?
So, the first thing I would say is you need a media that is receptive to radical ideas.
You're not going to get one. Okay, so let's park that.
Well, open democracy is that.
No, of course, of course.
I don't want to promote.
But the thing at the moment that drives me bananas about talking about the state of things is everybody says, well, oh, isn't the Daily Mail awful? Well, I know that, right? And I know it's an obstacle and it's there, and we'll probably have to factor that in for the time being. How do we start a conversation without Paul Dacre's permission about these things?
Well, you can choose. Okay. You can choose not only to not read the Daily Mail, but not share the Daily Mail, not give them the oxygen even in your disapproval or your sharing.
Okay, let's park the Daily Mail as well, because it makes me feel weird.
Okay, right, well, you brought the Daily Mail up.
But how do you begin a conversation about changing the political system?
How do you begin? Well, you start changing your media and you start changing the people that you speak with, right? So you try and speak to people who aren't like yourself and who have different experiences and backgrounds and bring different perspectives. We all live in tribes. I have a daughter who's about to start primary school, and I noticed that everyone self-segregates at that primary school. All the mothers waiting at the gate speak to people who look like them, come from the same socio-economic background or racial or cultural background. We do it all the time. So challenge yourself to speak to someone who doesn't look or sound like you. That's probably the first thing. Change the media you read, okay? Think about who funds the media that you read, and think about how you might want to, and do some research and find out where you're getting your information from.
And what do you talk about in terms of concrete changes that you'd like to make that perhaps would have some chance of, igniting a broader public conversation? I can't go to Mete and talk about electoral reform, you see. No one's that interested, and I don't blame them.
Well, I do think some of the things you threw out there are good ideas, right? So voting at 16, I think that is actually a really good idea. Yes, you're right, you can't go into the sort of specifics of AV or PR, whatever else in certain communities. You can talk to people about what they would do if they were in charge.
Can I just say, what about...
Yeah, go on, Nimco.
So can I just say, what about gender equality? We have 51% of the population who are women, and equality would actually be great for all of us. So we technicalize everything. It's all about photo reform or this. Actually, do you know what? It doesn't really matter who's in government as long as they're kind and they're committed to equality. So it's one of the things is that we're not going to change the system in the next 5 years, but we can actually change the policies. So we can't be bothered having these conversations about giving 16-year-olds the vote and all these things, which I completely agree with. But why don't we just fix the things that we have? So what is the education system, whether it's the fact that 40,000 girls in London get raped every year, there's 120,000 cases of domestic violence. Like, young black boys are dying at a rate of 2 a day in the last few weeks, and nobody's talking about any of that. Those are the things that really matter and I care about. So the idea of photo reform and all these other kind of things, those are further on. It's about practical things that we can actually change in the next 4 weeks. And I think the Women's Equality Party, my manifesto, which is out and which has been delivered to every single political party, is something that they can all accept and just start off with it and just put us out of business, and let's just be kinder to each other rather than just sitting here and just having intellectual masturbation sessions and just talking about things again and again. I'm sorry, I'm just really bored of...
Podemos in Spain, for example, one of the most interesting, exciting political movements of recent years, would say in response to that talking about changing the political system isn't intellectual masturbation, because unless you start to talk about that stuff, changing society more widely just completely leaves the conversation.
But the next 4 weeks,
representation.
4 weeks. 4 weeks, we have 4 weeks to
well,
change
I want to talk about 4 weeks, but I also want to talk about 4 years and 14 years and 40 years. I think we have to take a strategic view.
I think
Go on.
that Take Back the City was quite a good experiment in figuring out how to change the process. And what we've talked about is having like a code of ethics. So like a community could come together and decide what things they would like their councillors to sort of do for them or fight their corner on. For example, like where I work is mainly in the Royal Docks, and there's a huge airport. Well, it didn't used to be big, but they're expanding it at City Airport. And, if we had, of the 3 councillors there, if they each signed up to committing to stopping this expansion and supporting the community and working with them to stop it, then perhaps, people would have more faith in their representatives, and that's a good, way of sort of working together and having accountability and transparency. And then if they don't do as their community wants, then they can be, impeached or whatever.
Okay. Bess, do you think talking about representation will inevitably sound like intellectual masturbation and is one of those things that 500 people on Twitter are interested in, and it won't have a purchase in the real world?
Unfortunately,
that's a sincere question.
Unfortunately, yes. I think that talking up proportional representation is right now a waste of time.
Okay.
Let's not talk about changing the current system. Let's instead talk about creating an entirely new one. that doesn't involve the existing structures, that doesn't involve current parties, that gets around the problems we have with the fact that people aren't represented because of our electoral system. And it's not about tactical voting, I don't think. I don't think it's about getting parties to have a stitch-up between each other in order to bring about some sort of gerrymandered electoral control. Instead, let's give people what they really need, which is the power to influence and change things.
What does that mean?
So my answer, More United's answer, is two things: money and people. The money. One thing that we do is crowdfund, and we raise a huge amount of money. So far, we've raised £500,000. And we give that money to political candidates who agree with our values and will happily stand by them, regardless of what party they're from. Really doesn't matter what party.
Or even Tories?
Even Tories. We'd raised £500,000 from thousands and thousands of people. We have 80,000 supporters. The average donation, by the way, is 35 quid. And
do you see there's an uneasiness there?
Yeah.
You want to change the world and you're giving money to candidates from the Conservative Party. On the face of it, I find that a bit odd.
Absolutely.
Anna Soubry.
Anna Soubry. She's one of the best Conservatives out there. But in this election, we have already funded 30 candidates from all different parties, the ones who agree with our progressive values. And yes, there are some Conservatives that do agree with us. And we'll hope to fund 30 more at least. And basically what that's done is given the thousands and thousands of people who have joined our crowdfund the ability to act like hedge fund managers. Because they have got £500,000, which they are now channeling into politics. And they are competing with the multimillionaires who are bankrolling the extreme right. And they are competing with the trade unions that are bankrolling the extreme left. They are bankrolling the extreme centre with £500,000 worth of money. That is huge.
So trade unions aren't part of your vision of a better world?
I think trade unions are very important, but it's undeniable that they do have a huge influence over the extreme left.
On behalf of their millions of members?
Okay, so crucially, so More United has anyone who's donated to our crowdfund crucially gets to vote on which candidates we support, so it's democratic. So it's them making the decision. But it's not just money, it's numbers as well. Numbers are really important. If we can build millions and millions of people in the centre ground, kind of like what UKIP did on the far right, which is, had one MP and 3.5 million voters that changed our country forever. Let's do the same. Let's get millions of people together, work with the politicians that we will have elected after the 8th of June, the 40, 50, 60 politicians that we'll have elected, to amplify their voice and give them the confidence to stick their head above the parapet. But also have millions of ordinary people wearing a T-shirt saying ordinary person with political powers, and get them to radicalise the centre ground, stand up for what they believe in, and hold their views extremely.
Okay, some of this will need clarifying. That may happen in the course of the question. I'm going to ask Paul about this. Isn't the centre ground what got us in this mess?
That's what I thought. Sorry.
Isn't that the point? That the mushy, Tony Blair, George Osborne, Paddy Ashdown centre ground is precisely what created the vacuum that led to Brexit, because it didn't represent the places that I keep banging on about.
So maybe let's not blame Paddy for that. I do think I do think the third way in the centre ground, screwed up. I think they screwed up their economics. I think they failed. They failed to engage with large parts of the British public, who ended up voting for Brexit, and large parts of the American public who ended up voting for Trump. And that was a failure of the centre ground of the third way politics, which reigned fairly unchallenged. Transition from Blair to Cameron and so forth. For me, this isn't really about, some magical centre ground solution. It's about whether we can fundamentally reconstruct all aspects of our politics. And I think on that, the answer is not to talk in an impotent way for another 20 years about proportional representation. The answer is to actually go and start reconstructing our politics. So that means that we need political movements. I think More United is really interesting. I think the Progressive Alliance is really interesting. I think there are a whole bunch of other movements out there which are starting to grow up and get involved in politics in a more engaged way. I think we need new candidates. and new kinds of political campaigns. I think the listening campaign that Amina and the Take Back the City people ran, where they went around and actually listened to people and asked them about their daily life concerns, some of the stuff that Nimco was talking about, and then turned that into a political agenda, was really, really powerful and interesting. But you've got to also realize the resistance in the system. You are working with first-past-the-post elections in many cases, and you're working with a very, very entrenched old politics system with a lot of power behind it, which says things like strong and stable over and over again. So you need leadership, you need to think about how you build a new kind of relationship with the public, and that's the thing, unfortunately, with Jeremy Corbyn, despite his insurgency, completely failed to do, because he's not new politics in the end. And I've been on television talking about how some things that were meant to have done have been good, right? But it's not enough, and we're seeing that.
Nimco, if you and what you're doing and the people that you're working with are successful, what will be the signs of that?
A better country, and honestly, so just think about this. The fear, it's not necessarily, so for me, it's not necessarily even about gender equality, it's about young people as well, so I can kind of relate to that. The idea that as young women, I get paid, less than men. I can't afford a house. The fact that I fear rape, if I have a child, I don't have anywhere to take that child, makes our country worse off. So the idea of free childcare, so one of the things is that we have costed free childcare. That will change the lives of millions of people, and it will change the lives of a generation. So the key thing about an equal society is it's a better society. So it's not miracle, it's not magic or any of these things. It's very simple. So the Women's Equality Party and looking at equality just gives us a better future and a better way of life. So it's not, I'm not talking about Trident, I'm not talking about all these other kind of photo reforms and everything else. I'm just talking about creating a better and creative and kinder society. And one of the reasons is that I love the fact that Liz is wearing the shirt. I tell the story, so for the last 2.5 weeks, I've been told by the Labour Party that I should not be standing because of the fact that I'm going to be splitting the vote. I'm not splitting the vote, I'm standing against every single political party that doesn't care about equality. The idea and the fact that I'm standing is a miracle. My mother, 27 years ago, landed 7 months pregnant in Heathrow with me and my 2 brothers, and she was a refugee. Because of the fact that she was taken in and she was given kindness, and the fact that I was put in education, I was given a place to live, means the fact that I can be a valuable contribution to this country. Right now, we have thousands of young people, thousands of children that have a right to be in the UK that are being left in Calais. So one of the things that I want to do about our politics is for it to be kind. And I want you all to, apart from joining the Women's Equality Party, because we're amazing, also support Help Refugees. There are thousands of young people like me who are deciding to choose love, and the Lib Dems have been the only people actually that have said that they put the Dobbs Amendment back in. I want a country that allows young people like me to have a choice and to have a chance, and that is what I want. It's like, I'm not going to stand here and say, talk about Brexit and inflation and all these things. I'm just talking about just being kind and being nice, and that's not a radical thing. I think it's the sensible thing to do. So yeah, that's what I have to say.
Mete, you work within an orthodox political party, the Labour Party. Tell me what your sense is of how that has to change in the context of what we've talked about.
Sorry, say that question again?
How the Labour Party has to change. I mean, clearly it's changed drastically in all sorts of ways over the last 2 years, but the conversation would suggest that it's still something people feel they sort of collide with somehow.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Labour Party's got, I mean, let's not be sort of kid ourselves here. The Labour Party's got massive challenges within the party. It's not the most unified party at the moment. And it's got big questions to answer. But I just wanted to come back onto some of the things that we spoke about here, because I think the question is about how do we reconnect people with politics. And I think the problem we're having in this panel already, from what I could see, is we all want to create a space where people come to us and not go to where people are. And that's the big problem. And, through my work, through My Life, My Say, we spoke about some of these areas that voted heavily Brexit. So we went up to places like in Northwest, Blackburn, Burnley, where it was the highest Leave vote in Northwest, places like Portsmouth in Southwest. And there was a girl that I met in Portsmouth, and she was an 18-year-old, and she lives in a hostel. And do you know what she said to me? So we was talking, I said to her, have you heard about the £350 million pledge about the NHS? And she said to me, what? I said to her, have you not heard about the £350 million pledge? And I was quite surprised that she didn't hear about it. And what she said to me was this, and this really hit me. She said to me, Mate, she goes, for the last 2.5 weeks, I've been working in the corner shop. She goes, I got paid 65 quid. And she goes, you know what the worst thing about it is? It's not about the fact that I got paid 65 pounds. She goes, I don't even have the time to think about why I'm angry, about why I got paid £65. I just got to move on. And she goes, do you really think I've got time to sit there and think about politics? And this is the thing, going back to, we spoke earlier about going in with, do we go talking about people about PR, talk about this, that? And the reality is, it's just all jargon that people don't even know about. And we need to go back to education, we need to go to grassroots, we need to educate people about what these, talk about issues, because, and it comes back to the point about talking to people or talking at people. Let's create safe spaces where people can come together, talk about, and that's one of the things that we do at My Life, My Say. We run these decafs, which Yasmin spoke about in the previous panel. And it looks at sort of reigniting that 17th century, discussing politics over coffee, but in a more modern way in which we can engage with our young people. Because reality is, if you invite a young person to Parliament, they're probably going to have to worry about how they're dressed. If they say something, are people going to look at them differently? And sometimes we don't even think about the practicalities about whether people can actually afford to dress smart as well. So what we do is bring them together in coffee houses, working with Starbucks and other local coffee houses, and get them to talk about issues in a safe space environment and let them drive the conversations, let young people drive the conversations. And that's what I think, we're talking about reconnecting people with politics. The reality is we're not going to do it over the next 5 years. We can do there is some good stuff that can be done around sort of tactical voting, etc. But it has to be a long-term project. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. We've got to look at it's got to start at early years, get into young people at a very young age, looking at educating them. If the political system says to us, no, we're not going to allow political education, then that's where it's up to organisations like us to really go in and start having those conversations in communities.
But hold on a minute, we'll take questions in a moment, sir. Don't shout at us, please. Mary, what's the project? We know what draws most people who've come here today together, right? We know what Brexit has highlighted. What's the project? Do you see what I mean?
How do you inspire people?
Yes, and where do we want to be in 15 or 20 years as regards avoiding these ruptures happening and perhaps making people feel more bound in to politics and like they have a stake in it?
I think
we had a thing called Charter 88 in the 80s, which gave some of us some hope. Because again, it seemed to understand that the reason that Thatcher and the miners' strike had happened had this rooting in a crisis of representation, right?
You mentioned Podemos. I'm going to talk about Barcelona en Comú, which is so Barcelona en Comú is a political movement in Barcelona. Recently, they were a housing activism organisation. They were preventing evictions, and they became so popular and they worked so well on the grassroots level in Barcelona that one of their leaders, Ada Colau, became the first female mayor of Barcelona. They I think, are conducting a really fascinating experiment in how you build from the ground up something successful and something sustainable that is built by the community, answers the community, and delivers real power to the community. And they are one example, but there are rebel cities or fearless cities or whatever you want to call them developing all over the world. There are plenty in the United States. And there are many across Europe.
Can you talk about them? Just come on, give us some more examples.
Well, I mean, Bill de Blasio wouldn't class himself this way, but I think what Bill de Blasio is doing in New York is fascinating. The same thing's happening in Philadelphia. There's a meeting in Barcelona from the 9th to the 11th of June where mayors from all over Europe and the United States are going to come together to talk about the experiments that they're conducting on a small, local, grassroots scale. I think this is a problem that we're going to be dealing with and talking about, even though talking is frustrating when you want to see action for quite some time, but learning from each other, learning what you're doing at that grassroots level is the key, and looking to other countries. The conversation in this country is unbelievably parochial. We talk about empire, right, all the time. In 2015 leadership debates, no one mentioned the rest of the world once, apart from to talk about immigration. And the most charismatic person, I think there were 8 people on that podium, was Nigel Farage. I disagree with everything he had to say, but he's the only one who spoke like a normal human being and didn't speak in political metaphor.
Before we open this to the floor, can I ask you a parochial question? Because that's kind of the way my mind works, I'm afraid. Are there flashes of a different way of doing politics and of having the political conversation in the UK that you've seen?
I think there is something interesting in the more united and other, sort of de-tribalizing efforts. There are quite a lot of them going on at the moment. I'm not sure if I'm radicalizing the center is quite where I'm at, but the idea of mobilizing citizens from the ground up to demand different things from politicians, detribalizing and making something that if citizens come together and say, no, none of these political parties appeal to us, we're going to do things our way, we're going to organize differently, and we're going to demand things of you, I think that's a really interesting inversion of power, and we're just beginning to see the beginnings of that in some of these groups.
Very good. Right, let's open this to the floor. I don't know whether you've got house lights, because at the moment everybody looks like the Bohemian Rhapsody video, and I can't see anyone's face. We will take sort of questions and points in groups of 3. Please don't make speeches, we haven't got time. Are people queuing? That's all men. Are there any women who want to ask a question? I'm not taking a group of questions from 3 men. I'm sorry, that's not right.
So you've already changed.
So the first man in the queue, you can ask your question, and then perhaps the second man, but in each round of question, if we don't have at least one woman, we're doing our job wrong. The woman there. Sorry, it's dark.
There's 3 women here.
Are these questions gender segregated? That's clever.
Can people who
Okay,
haven't
so
asked
man
questions
there,
ask
man there, then a woman from over here, please. So fire away, whoever's at the front of the queue.
Okay.
Oh, it's a woman.
Sorry, no.
There was a man there who looked all cross when I said questions for women. So you can actually ask a question, sir. Fire away.
Thank you. I think that there's been a lot of discussion today about, will Brexit happen? I think it probably will, but I think what we should be doing is we should be looking at the root causes of that. And I read an analysis by Dennis Novy and co, so if you can find it, it's to do with the demographic split of the Brexit vote at Warwick University. And he found through his analysis that areas that are typically fiscally deprived and areas that have poor qualities of education were more likely to vote leave than areas that were increasingly exposed to the EU. That is a fundamental problem with this country. And I think that one way that we reconnect people with politics is we listen to those areas of the country. I'm from the northeast of England. Theresa May made a trip up there yesterday, probably the first time she's gone there in about 5 years. We need to connect people in those areas, the northeast, the northwest, the southwest.
Very good. I don't think she connected with many people, but she's not really doing that at the moment, I have to say. Okay, woman over there.
Yes. I hope you can hear me. We hear a lot about tribes. From these 2 days, I've really gathered that 2 of the tribes who don't talk to each other are old people. I'm 70 this year. Apparently, it was the peak of the baby boom, 1947, year of my birth. So I'm very aware of age this year. And I think that could you suggest ways in which there could be better communication between young people and old people? I think there's a certain amount of suspicion on both sides. I've really felt a bit of contempt from young people for old people. And I really think we have a great deal to gain from working with each other. A lot of people my age are also very lonely and would love to have more contact with young people. And the other thing that hasn't been talked about at all, about Brexit and anything else, in these last 2 days, is how poor we are in this country at speaking any other languages but English. And do you not think we might have a different relationship with the world if it was a priority, as it is in most other countries, for people to learn at least one other language other than their mother tongue?
Okay, and the woman over, go on, woman by the microphone here.
I kind of got the feeling when I came today, I don't know what I expected, that this is the elite out of power talking about how this elite can get back into power and a kind of lot of fashionable people. And I didn't hear, I heard very little about workers' rights. I heard a couple, you've mentioned poverty, a couple of people, but nothing else about it. Yet a big issue is Brexit and workers' rights. Where are the poor people? There's 1 or 2 people maybe here with a poor background, but yes, but all day, not so much. And yet I wanted to hear about Brexit and poverty. I'm a member of the European Anti-Poverty Network. There's big issues there right across Europe, so where was that? And then the other thing is, why, if you're talking about getting other people in, why wasn't there someone from Scotland to talk about civic nationalism and how to build that when you're talking about a different form of Englishness? And the last thing is, I live in hog roast territory, in a village in rural Middle England, and nothing anybody has said today will play there. And that's because you keep talking to people. Come and visit us.
Got that, John.
Amina, in no particular order, obviously you do your politics in London. How much do you feel the sort of imperative to go to the sorts of places that have been mentioned?
I feel a massive imperative because I think I was making this point before, like the other day when I was being interviewed, that there are some things going on in my borough that I'm sure are just like the things that are going on across the country. And I'd love to meet other communities. And if someone would pay for my train ticket, because it's too expensive for me to go everywhere. But like, yeah, there's definitely a disconnect between London and the rest of the country. But I would say that there is deep deprivation and disadvantage in London as well. And maybe if we connected and found out about, the struggles that you're facing in your area with the deprivation and the poverty in your area and what's going on in my areas, and found out like what our groups are doing, because there's very active people doing things about it, and how we can collaborate to raise our voices for national change. I think that's a really, really great idea. And what Mary was saying before about the Barcelona sort of meeting of different groups that are doing grassroots activism, I think it's really, really important, because it gives us hope that we can change the process, and that's what it is, the process. I do feel your pain about elitism and the diversity today, actually, in the voices. Yeah.
See, I find that...
Okay, hold on a minute. Nimco, come on, what were you going to say?
Do you know what? I find this thing that the metropolitan liberal elite is something to be embarrassed about and something to be ashamed of. I live in a city where, black, Asian, Chinese, white people all intermix and all kind of connect together. I am liberal. I don't believe in the death penalty. I want to pay my taxes. I want to fix the NHS. I want to do all these things. And the idea of elitism, what does that mean? It's because, I want that to be defined, because the way that the elitism is to be educated, but then to want other people to be educated. The idea that someone like Nigel Farage drinking in the Ritz speaks for you and is bringing down the establishment is actually quite scary. And one of the things about tribalism, and this is the thing when you were saying about the centre and creating that centre, there are good people that vote for the Tory party. There are good people that vote for the Lib Dems, Greens, and the Labour Party. My family, half of my family died, and half of my family have been spread across the world because of tribalism, because of a civil war. And that is what's really scary about this whole kind of conversation. The idea, yes, we are in London, and I know this panel could have been more diverse, but we have what we have at the moment, and we want to work with you. So to come to London and attack us when I'm a child of a refugee, this is another African girl sitting here, a South Asian guy sitting here, and there's all of us sitting here to say that we're not diverse. I think that's unfair. Okay. I think we are quite diverse.
Mete, be quick and I'll take two more questions.
I was just going to say, thinking about innovative ways in terms of how we can reach people in Middle England and other parts of the country is one of the things that we do is, so this again, talking about creating a platform, rather than creating a platform and inviting people to your space, is why don't we go to people where people already exist. So for example, one of the things we do is, I come from a footballing background where I used to be a scout for Arsenal and for Southampton. And how do we work with football clubs, for example, who work with so many boys and girls in communities who probably don't have no access to sort of decision making. So places like Notts County, where we work with Notts County Football Club, etc. And how do we really reach out to these and then make those connections there, and finding these spaces where people already are and we can connect with. And that's, I think, sort of some of the innovative things that we got to do, rather than creating the spaces and expecting people to come to us. Because the reality is, everything's in London. Where all these spaces exist, people expect everyone to come to London, but we need to start thinking about innovative ways in which we can go outside London. And one of the ways to do that is through collaboration of where people already exist.
Okay, I'm going to go to the remaining three panellists once you've had, say, 2 or 3 more questions if they're really quick. So gentleman here and then woman over here. Keep them quick because we've only got 4 or 5 minutes left.
Would there be any merit in adopting the Australian system and making voting compulsory?
That's a good direct question. Thank you,
yes.
sir. Okay, over there, far away.
Mine's quite a quick one. As someone who's very passionate and wants to get involved because I'm worried about the direction of travel, where do I go to? There are lots of organisations, More United, Open Britain, the Gina Miller crowdfunding campaign, all looking at quite similar sort of things, and I want to know where's my energy best spent.
Okay, great. And then a question from over here. This is the last question. Fire away.
Hi, I come from the land of 96%. I wasn't eligible to vote in Cameron's manifesto commitment to actually do the referendum, but I was eligible to vote in the referendum. And now I see myself, if Brexit actually means Brexit, as a non-European. I'm still a British national, but I will not be eligible to vote in the general elections, and I need your help.
Okay. Paul, they're all very direct points. Compulsory voting. Where do you go to? What organisation? And please, can people refrain from saying mine? Which organisations, plural, should people get involved with? And then the gentleman there is not a British national and therefore hasn't got the vote. He needs your help.
I mean, in terms of which organisation to go to, I would go and support and engage with anything which looks like it's going to work for you and which you believe in. You know, so if you can give a small donation, if you can go and volunteer and knock on some doors, just trust your gut and trust your judgment. Look at it. I believe in people standing up, getting involved, people being smart. I think that some of the things that people said earlier about unheard voices really rang true for me. Some of the most inspiring and humbling experiences of my life have been going and helping people organize or watching people organize in their communities outside of the centers of power and seeing how the conversation there is so much more real than the conversation that you get in the sort of zombie center of power. I hardly even go into Westminster anymore, and I kind of work in politics because I cannot stand the way in which they're talking to themselves all the time. You know, there are bigger issues at stake. So I would say just stand up, get involved, find something that works for you, and also, most crucially, connect with other people in your local area and start finding things to do together with them. So, you know, I think that in the next 4 weeks, there's hardly any time. It's probably not going to ultimately change the outcome, but people can get together in their local areas and have some kind of impact on the conversation and the outcome.
Thank you, Paul. Bess, your thoughts. Who, what to join, and then can you answer? I don't know how you feel about compulsory voting. Tell me. I assume would there be a none of the above box person who asked that question?
Should be.
Yes, I think we'd have to have one of those, wouldn't we? Right, good.
I've got to say, I don't think compulsory voting is the answer. I think it's silly forcing people to vote for something they don't necessarily want at all. You have to change politics first. In order to decide who to join, I agree with Paul. Go out, research different ones, talk to other people, go and email the organisations you're looking at and ask them why they should get involved. And to the gentleman who can't vote, I'm sorry you can't vote, but get involved yourself. You can still volunteer, you can still donate, you can still join an organisation and make a difference that way.
Okay, to conclude, no pressure, Mary.
I want to defend the metropolitan elite again, actually. This is a city. Linton Crosby is responsible for strong and stable, strong and stable, strong and stable, right? Theresa May is going to win a landslide. This city is the only part of the UK that has rejected Linton Crosby comprehensively. He ran a horrible dog whistle campaign and supported by the only free sheet, the Evening Standard, which was basically a mouthpiece for Zach Goldsmith. And we turned around and said, absolutely not, no way. Not in this place, not in this city, and I think we should be very proud of that. So, you know, I'm not going to be apologetic for being a Londoner. To your question about who to support, choice is good. It's great. There are initiatives springing up all over the place. Two of the panelists here are doing them, but there are so many more. So don't ask people who you should support. Go out and find out and do what feels right to you. Voting, I think compulsory voting is a nice idea if you can also spoil your ballot. I worry about how you'd actually enforce that. That goes against some of my metropolitan liberal tendencies to punish people for not voting. I forget the last question. What was it?
There was a gentleman there who hasn't got the vote and says, can he have your help?
This is a broader point, I think. I said before, talk to people who aren't like you, talk to people who are different, who look different, who've had different experience and background than you. I think also it's really important, and this is for everyone a more broad answer, to try and discover the other. There are some really interesting citizen diplomacy initiatives going on in the States where people who voted for Trump and people who did not vote for Trump or who might have organized against Trump are coming together to talk about what they might have in common. And more and more people are realizing that while their politics radically differ, some of their life experiences and their life aspirations don't. I think seeking out difference, finding people whose views are radically different from your own is one of the most political acts you can probably do right now. The political acts you can probably take right now. Many politicians and many political movements, particularly on the alt-right, are capitalizing on making us feel more different than we actually are. So I'd suggest go and find some people you disagree with and have a respectful, open conversation with them.
Thank you. So by way of hopeful conclusions, I think in the last sort of 15 or 20 minutes we've heard lots. Listen. Particularly listen to the other side, in quote marks. Be inspired by examples from around the world. Look beyond our own shores. Vote. If you haven't got the vote, get involved. We all know where activism and dreaming and political ambition led for the other side, and it climaxed on June 23rd last year. I think that puts the onus on those of us on the other side of the argument to really ramp up what we do and to increase involvement and consciousness and our sense of strategic purpose. We've heard a lot of that today. We heard a lot of it brilliantly from our panel. Please join me in thanking them.